国际线出发，我是刘姿玲。我们今天呢要继续带大家来关注的是日元的走势。最近大家都很关心日元的疲软到底会持续到什么时候，尤其是在触及34年来的低点之后。日本央行似乎有意的出手，但是接下来如果亚洲货币竞贬，会不会带起一波新的金融危机呢？我们今天非常荣幸请到的一位特别的来宾是静冈大学教授，他曾经呢在法国的里昂银行、德意志银行以及日商的瑞穗银行有24年的资历，同样也担任过 BBC、CNN、CNBC 跟 Bloomberg 超过3000场访问的竹下诚二郎教授。Welcome, Sejiro Takeshita.Thank
you for having me.
今天呢，非常荣幸呢。其实我们看到很多呢，在日本的研究上，大家都在关注的是最近日本央行的出手，也就是 BOJ 到底做了什么样的动作？4月29号呢，日元对美元一度贬到了155元的大关。当时呢，随后急速的反弹，大家也很关注的是150、160这个区间是不是守得住？5月1号开始呢，纽约的尾盘忽然急升3%，到底日本央行想的措施是什么？而接下来呢，在这个日元货币当中又如何来观察？那接下来我们就要请教的是呢，Takeshitaさん。其实呢，在这个日本的货币走弱的同时，未来大家也很关注的是日本央行以及政府的态度。As Japanese yen continues to weak against dollar, and people, especially investors, are wondering whether Bank of Japan, BOJ, or government officials take steps to prop up the currency. So what do you see? Will there be several steps of the Japanese government, or what's your take on this?
Well, I think there will be some verbal interventions and maybe some intervention, but we all know that singular intervention do not really work anymore. And let's not forget that the market powers are far greater than central banks these days, especially if you're going on singular intervention, it's not going to work. But that said, because from desperation, there could be a case, particularly when we see weakening of the yen, which exacerbates the inflationary condition. Now, in Japan, inflation isn't as serious like in the United States because it's cost-push inflation. It's not demand-pull inflation like in the United States. Therefore, you can see that our CPI, for example, the signs of inflation isn't as serious at all. So far it's okay. But if we see, for example, commodity price rise, oil price, for example, accommodated with weakening of the yen, then that would be a very, very big hindrance to the Japanese economy in the future. So that, I think, will be the time when Bank of Japan will intervene. When we see an acute move, especially in the foreign exchange market, I think that is when they make the move. And they will, I think, start with verbal intervention because, in my opinion, Bank of Japan really do not have the deep pocket that many people think. Firstly, consider our debt conditions as a government. And also Bank of Japan itself, their current account has reached already 600 trillion yen. And so from that political point of view, it's very difficult for them to start raising the rates. And again, it goes back to the economy as well. Our economy isn't that brisk. Okay, we're seeing fairly good capital expenditure, but a lot of it is backpedaling in the sense that it's to do with, shortage of personnel, etc. Not really economic multiplying type of investment. I think the investors or the Japanese corporates are still extremely conservative in that sense. So from that point of view, I think it's very difficult for Bank of Japan to start raising the rates. So when people ask me about the rates, I always say, watch what the Fed is going to do. That has much more significance towards the yen condition.
But according to lots of media said, okay, we observe that the Japanese yen will still continue to decline.
Yeah.
It has something to do with the Federal Reserve.
Yes.
So what's your observation of the American rate policy to do with the Japanese yen?
Well, I think the Fed and also even the ECB has much more maneuverability, has more capability, and also the reasoning backing, theoretical backing to start raising the rates in comparison to that back in Japan. So from that point of view, if we are continuing seeing a strength in the U.S. economy, which we do, I think the Fed will continue to basically strengthen, their policy, strengthen their monetary policy, meaning that the interest rate deviation with the Japanese will continue to rise. So for there being from a fundamental point of view, I think it's very difficult to argue against further weakening the yen. But that said, of course, as I said, there will be a lot of intervention. There will be a lot of psychological type of verbal intervention that will be conducted by the Japanese government. And if we see, for example, a possible collapse, domino collapse, because of this excessive weakening of the yen, then I think we might see some kind of a joint coalition, basically to halt it. But we're far from that position yet, I think.
OK， 这是一个很好的观察，因为呢，其实，在联准会的策略当中呢，大家也很好奇的是，因为有非常多的杂志媒体来报道关于日元的贬值对于未来经济的走势，所以我们可以观察到 Barron's 呢最近在最新的期刊当中呢，也认为说日元的走贬呢会带来未来的货币战争。那当然，我们如果来观察的话，其实他提出了一个非常有趣的观点，是亚洲的货币在不同的国家表现，尤其呢是在这个出口导向的印尼、韩国、泰国等等地方。那在印尼方面呢，4月24号。印尼的央行呢，非常破天荒的升息了1码，就是7年来的高点位置。那事实上呢，根据 Barron's 的报道呢，他认为说，其实正在从新兴的经济体夺走资本，所以呢，美元极端的走强可能不会对亚洲带来好结果。So we will follow up the strong currency issue about the dollar because we see that a lot of people they are observing the Asian economy with the currency, especially Indonesia. They raise their rate. Apparently, it's like for the past 7 years, it's the first time for them to do that. So, how do you observe this kind of situation, and what will these related government to do, like Thailand, Korea, etc.? They will follow up or not?
I think compared to, let's say, the previous Asian crisis that we had, or even the Lehman crisis, what has really strengthened is conversations and talk amongst the authorities. So there is much more a better plateau and structure to halt this negative domino from happening. So if we see signs of that, I think we will see a coalition, particularly now that we have a war of hegemony between the United States and China. So obviously, there is all the benefit from the United States and the free world to keep their alliance in a good state. So I think I should say the talk, or I should say methodology to halt negative, domino from falling will take place. So from that point of view, I'm not as worried as people who talk about the revival of the Asian crisis. I doubt that will be the case because there's a lot of haltage that would take place. And again, the structure is totally different from then. The big difference, I think, is a threat from China. Then their place in the economy was only 3%. Now it's well above 15%. And we also know that they're utilizing their military power along with their economic power to strengthen their influence. And that basically results in total change of global network chain and distribution chain. Now, I don't think that it's all bad for Asian nations because what we will have is, in fact, we'll benefit from it. The interesting thing for countries like, I think, Indonesia and the rest of Asia is especially what's called the transactional 25s, who do not necessarily strongly belong to the US side, like that of Japan or Taiwan, and who does not belong to the unitarian side, like that of Russia or China, who are in between, who would want to benefit from those sides, and who has to benefit from these sides. That, I think, those countries, I think, is in a very, very delicate position. But I think they are basically at this moment in a position to get benefit from this transition of global supply chain that's going through right now globally, particularly led by the Americans, especially the likes of Sullivan Doctrine.
Okay, according to your thesis, will there be a currency war in the future? Because people are wondering, will it cause the effect like back in 2008?
Well, it won't be a currency war like, for example, the one that we saw in Thailand. I don't think that will be the case because authorities and the market knows very well which power is which and who has the power superiority and how that trend changes quite quickly. And that is why, I'm saying that the joint coalition is very important. And the connection with the central banks to halt, from these negativities that are happening is much more secure and much more I should say, sophisticated than those days. We have learned in the past 30 years, I think, quite a lot.
Okay, so with the geopolitical status, especially in Japan, so do you find any opportunities for Japan to rise again economically?
Oh, definitely. War of hegemony between China and the United States, the beneficiary definitely will be the likes of Japan, Taiwan, and Korea. There needs to be a coalition that, for example, the best example is like semiconductor business. I mean, one of the top issues about the Sullivan Doctrine by the United States is basically putting China out of the spectrum of the high-end side of the semiconductor side, meaning that there would be more concentration on areas surrounding it, like Taiwan, Japan, and Korea. And I think at the same time, there's a very big transition that's also happening in Japan as well, but elsewhere globally, about warding off China excessively from their supply chain, which means that from geographical point of view and also from the technical point of view, the beneficiaries will be the likes of Japan, Taiwan, Korea.
Okay, thank you very much, Takeshita-san. 非常感谢静冈大学教授竹下诚二郎带来非常精辟的解析。更多讯息，请去锁定。我们稍后回来。
Hello， 我是陈雅玲。想要抢先掌握最及时的新闻资讯吗？赶快订阅、按赞、开启小铃铛，锁定华视新闻 YouTube 频道。